We're in Romans 10, and starting in verse 18, we title chapter 10, The Rejection of Israel. And God rejected Israel simply because Israel had rejected God. Once again, the Jews thought that they could tell, in essence, God how to save them. They thought that they were saved just because they were Jews. And God, through Paul, says you couldn't be more wrong if you wanted to. It's not a matter of what lineage you're from. It matters if you're in Christ. So we've looked at the reason for the rejection in verses 1 to 4, remedy for that, 5 to 17, and now verses 18 to 21 as we round out the chapter and then get into chapter 11. We're looking at the results of their rejection. And Adam, if you will, just read the rest of the chapter for us there, Romans 10, 18 through 21.
But I say, have they not heard? Yes, verily, their sound went into all the earth, and their words into the ends of the world. But I say, did not Israel know? For Moses said, I will provoke you to jealousy by them that are no people, and by a foolish nation I will anger you. But Isaiah is very bold and said, I was found of them that sought me not. I was made manifest unto them that asked not after me. But to Israel he said, all day long I have stretched forth my hand unto a disobedient and gainsaying people.
All right, back up into verse 18. Again, when Paul asked the question, have they not heard? He's speaking of the Jews. This whole context is talking about, again, the rejection of the Jews, the fact that they are guilty. Now, their refusing to believe is not because they didn't have opportunity to hear. Have they not heard? And to prove this, Paul quotes Psalm 19 in verse 4, and the prophecy was that everybody would hear, that the gospel would be spread to all people. And so when we come to Acts, the 2nd chapter, in the first gospel sermon, the Bible tells us that all nationalities were represented on that day. Men from every nation under heaven. So, again, that meant that those who heard the gospel could in turn go to their respective homes, be it down south in Egypt, be it up north in Italy, or wherever, and they could from Jerusalem scatter, as they were from every nation, having heard the gospel. They, having obeyed the gospel, could then scatter like the spokes of a wheel in all directions and take the gospel with them. And so everything was strategically in place there in Acts, the 2nd chapter. And of course, that the fulfillment of the Great Commission as given by Jesus. Paul would say in Colossians that the gospel had been preached to every person under heaven, whereof he had been made a minister. So the Jews could not say, well, we would have believed if only we could have heard. Well, you can't say that, Paul is saying, and God is saying, well, you've had opportunity to hear, but again, everybody doesn't choose to believe. Their words went unto the ends of the world. You may recall that when Paul stood before Agrippa and talked about other things, he didn't give a defense of himself as much as he gave a defense of Christianity. And among the things that Paul said to Agrippa was, this thing was not done in a corner. It's not that Christianity is some secret sect and God wants nobody but a limited few to know about this. In other words, the crucifixion of Jesus and the gospel message, why, it's available worldwide. We're not trying to keep this a secret. It was not done in a corner. And so Israel could not say, we don't believe because we've never heard. Well, they couldn't give that excuse. They also couldn't say, verse 19, well, we didn't know. We just simply didn't know. We didn't have opportunity to know about the truth. That objection Paul addresses in verse 19. But I say, did not Israel know? That is, did not Israel understand? For Moses said, I will provoke you to jealousy. The you is who? Starts with a J, Jews. I will provoke Jews, the Jewish nation, to jealousy by them that are no people. And they would be the Gentiles. Okay? And by a foolish nation, the Gentiles, I will anger you. Paul's point is you ought to have known that the gospel's for everybody. In fact, your own Old Testament said the gospel's for everybody. And he is looking at Deuteronomy chapter 32, I think is the reference here, at least one reference here to this, where Moses gives the prediction, I'm going to provoke you to jealousy by them that are no people. You've made me mad by worshiping idols. I'm going to make you mad by giving opportunity for salvation to another nation. It's not going to be just Jews, my people. It's going to be anybody, my people, including the Gentiles. The Jews looked upon the Gentiles as a no people. The Jews looked upon the Gentiles as a foolish nation. Paul uses the Jewish thinking of the Gentiles in the wording he chooses here. I will provoke you, Israel, to jealousy by those you think who are nobody, a bunch of nobodies. The Jews thought the Gentiles were a bunch of nobodies. They thought that they were foolish. And again, this was nothing but prejudice. And it really worked both ways. But again, the point addressed here, the Jew often looked at the Gentile as being little more than a dog simply because he was a Gentile. They didn't ask, I wonder what kind of character this person has. I wonder what kind of reputation this person has. They just looked down on somebody simply because he was a Gentile. And that is, as we've said, that's prejudice. Prejudice, when you break that word down, means to prejudge. That is to judge without having all the facts. We talked about that on Wednesday evening in our devotional. And to prejudge somebody based on their looks or where they're from or what nationality is just clearly wrong. It's just clearly wrong. Sometimes people look upon those from the Middle East, those who are Arabs, and they see a woman wearing, I forget the name of what they wear, and there's an automatic judgment. That's got to be a terrorist, right? That's got to be somebody up to no good. That's a prejudging. That's prejudice. And the Jews weren't the only ones guilty. Sometimes we are also as well, and it's wrong. But again, Paul's point is really not to discuss prejudice so much here as it is to say you should have known that the gospel's for everybody, because even Moses made the prediction that you would be angered when the gospel went to those you consider to be nobodies. I will provoke you to anger, and certainly the Jews were provoked to anger, and you can read about the persecution that the early church faced from the hands of, first of all, the Jews. As Adam is outlining in the religious history class, the church persecution first began by the Jews and then carried on by some of the Roman emperors. And they were definitely provoked to anger, is the idea. Now then, verse 20. I've quoted Moses. Let me quote Isaiah, who is the same as Isaiah. Again, that's the Greek rendering of the Hebrew word. In most translations, modern translations, just go ahead and say Isaiah. That's who it is. So Isaiah is very bold and said this. What reference do you have where Isaiah said this? What does your reference indicate? 65:1, 65:1 and 2, the 65 chapter. This is what Paul's using the Jewish writings to try and win these people over. Let's go back to the Old Testament. Do you believe in the Old Testament? Let's go back to the Old Testament. Let's talk about what Moses said. Let's talk about what Isaiah said. Isaiah is very bold. He is predicting the inclusion of Gentiles for salvation. That would be a bold thing to do in front of people who had no use for the Gentiles. So Isaiah boldly expressed the doctrine without reserve. I was found of them that sought me not. Referring to the Gentiles. I was found of them that sought me not. I was made manifest unto them who did not ask after me. At first, the Gentiles refused to seek God. Romans 1. It was their downhill slide, but finally they did. Again, your own Old Testament told you that the good news would go to not only Jew, but also to Gentile. So it's not that you haven't heard this, and it's not that you could not have understood. 21, but to Israel he saith, all day long I've stretched forth my hands unto a disobedient and gainsaying people. The same Isaiah passage predicted that the Jews would be rejected. And the Jews never thought that. They never dreamed they would be rejected simply because they were Jews. Isaiah's trying to tell them even then, it takes more to be right with God than merely being a Jew. Just because you're a Jew doesn't mean you're automatically right with God. And this is just trying again and again to drive the point home to them. So all day long, verse 21, all day long, continually, I have held out my hands. You may think about the prodigal son's father, and I'm sure there wasn't a day that went by he didn't look down the road and sort of hold out his hands hoping what? Maybe today he's coming home. Maybe today he's coming home. And you think about it, all day long have I stretched forth my hands. Isn't that what Jesus did on the cross? Weren't his hands what? Stretched forth, nailed to the cross, almost as if wanting to embrace everybody who would come. Everybody would come to him, almost as if he's welcoming all. An open arms welcome is the idea, yearning for the salvation of people here. And specifically in this verse, of course, he's talking about the Jews. I pleaded with, I begged, I've yearned for my people who have become disobedient and who have become gainsaying. I've stretched forth my hands unto a disobedient and gainsaying people. Another word for gainsaying might be contrary. Contrary. That's what I've got in my notes. I need to write that in my Bible. Stretch forth my hands unto a disobedient and contrary people. We've all heard about people being contrary, right? He's just a contrary person. Well, with some people you can't win, I guess. But it's the idea of being disobedient and talking back and rebelling, which aptly described the Jews at this time and really aptly describes a lot of mankind even today. It's not that they could not know. It's not that they did not hear. The fault lies where? In the heart with them. And the same principle is true today. The fault lies in here. Not that I can't know, and not that I can't hear. The fault lies here if I reject God. Your thoughts on Romans chapter 10.
See them, and there's a negative, right, as you said, thought right there. And in our society today, when girls and women are barely clothed out in public, and it's accepted.
Right.
Such a contrast.
And we think we're better. Right.
Right. And it's just become, there's no modesty,
right,
there's no shame anymore.
No shame, nothing. We live in a godless world, and that's the world. And the danger is that we allow ourselves to fall into that trap of addressing that way. So that's a very good point, Barbara. Very, very good point. And you try to talk about this, you might as well just bang your head against the wall. It's sort of the feeling you get sometimes, because it seems that, so few people, that's just Wayne, or that's just Barbara, that's just the way they think. Well, the Bible's got something to say about how we dress. And we are to be clothed, so. And we may not be, with our situation today, we may not be as adverse to the ladies who are covering their heads, because we're covering our faces, so maybe it sort of evens out a little bit. If you saw somebody, wearing a mask out in public this time last year, that person got to be gravely sick or robbing a bank, right? That's sort of what we would think. But now, obviously, we're doing this because we need to, and it's trying for protection. So, very good. Well, in Romans 11, now we're going to get to Romans 12. Romans 12, the going gets a lot easier, but we've got one chapter to go. 36 verses in Romans 11. And when we look at Romans 11, if we take this out of context, then we're going to have Paul saying a lot of things that he didn't say. And those who believe in the doctrine of premillennialism, the belief that Jesus will come to the earth and rule for how long? 1,000 years on an earthly kingdom in Jerusalem. Those who believe in that doctrine use Romans or misuse Romans 11 to teach a lot of things that just aren't true. Let me give you 3 quotes. One says, we must not apply Romans 11 to the church today, because Paul is discussing a literal future for a literal nation. And the literal nation he's talking about is Israel. Another says, this chapter discusses the future conversion of the nation of Israel. Another, Paul's conversion is a pattern of how the nation of Israel, they're not talking about spiritual Israel when they're talking about Israel, they're talking about the Jews. The nation of Israel, fleshly Israel, will be saved when Jesus Christ returns to establish His kingdom on earth. Some are going to, again, lift passages from this context, and they're going to try to make Paul say those things that he never intended to say. So let's again keep in mind what's happening here, especially in Romans 9 through 11. The Jews have been rejected, and the only way they'll be accepted is by Christ, is by obeying Christ. Now, Paul is going to call about 4 witnesses in chapter 11 to show that Israel, though they're lost, they don't have to remain lost. And the first witness Paul will use himself, and that's verse 1. Some of the Jews might have drawn the conclusion that God no longer cared about them from the language Paul has used thus far. Like that last verse, Paul mentioned the Jews being disobedient and gainsaying. Some might have concluded, well, God thinks that we're just a hopeless cause. Well, not at all. Has God cast away His people? Paul's answer, absolutely not. He hasn't cast away anybody who hasn't cast Him away. Everybody can be saved. You may have a translation that says rejected. Has God rejected His people? Has God cast away His people? You might use the illustration from the sporting world. If you're wrapped up into football, sometimes the quarterback will look back and he's going to throw a pass, but nobody's open. What will he do oftentimes with the ball? Throw it away. I'm giving up on this play. I'm going to reject this play so that we'll live to make another play. So he's rejected. By throwing the ball away, he's cast away that particular play. Has God thrown away His people, the Jews? Absolutely, absolutely not. Don't get that idea. In fact, just look at who? Just look at me. If you think I'm saying that God is rejecting Jews just because they're Jews, you've gone to the other extreme. I'm a Jew. I am also an Israelite. I have descended from whom? Abraham. I'm of the seed of Abraham. And that puts you in the Jewish category, didn't it? Well, through Isaac, obviously. I'm an Israelite. I descended from Abraham. I can tell you what tribe I'm from, the tribe of Benjamin. What about the tribe of Benjamin? Was it one of the greatest tribes? One of the least, wasn't it? Who was from the tribe of Benjamin who became Israel's first king? Saul. Least of the tribes, least of the family in the tribe, he said. But Paul's point, God has not given up on anybody. You Jews can be saved, just like I was saved. I'm a Jew and I'm saved. But again, it's not going to be by following the law of Moses. We're this side of that. You've got to accept and obey Christ. Jews will not be saved merely because they're Jews. Paul has been driving that point home. But neither will Jews be lost merely because they're Jews. Nationality has absolutely nothing to do with salvation. Nothing at all. It doesn't matter now. In Jesus, there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, bond or free. Everybody's saved the same way, is the idea. So nobody is beyond the realm of salvation. Nobody is beyond the realm of salvation. People who live in Iran, people who live in China will not be lost just because they live there. And people who live in the United States aren't going to be saved just because we live here. Where we live has nothing to do with salvation. Okay? God hasn't cast anybody off if they haven't cast him off. Notice the second example Paul gives that there's hope for Israel. That's verse 2 beginning. He used the example of Elijah. God has not cast away his people whom he foreknew. God knew the Jews in the sense of approving them in the Old Testament before others, yes. I knew you before. Again, that goes back to their history in the Old Testament. I haven't rejected you. I love you. You've been my people. I want to save you too. Now, if you're using the King James Version, you have the word what? W-O-T. What does that mean? What? What does what mean? It doesn't mean what either. Somebody said it? No. So this is one of the, again, I use the King James translation, but I'm not going to use it here because I don't use the word what, W-O-T, today. I'm not making fun of this. This is just an outdated word. If I ask you, do you what the time? You're going to look at me like I'm insane, right? We don't use the word W-O-T. It means no. Do you know the time? So in my Bible, I've got underlined the word what, and I've got written the word no. Okay? Do you not know what the Scripture said of Elias? Or, who's Elias? Elijah. How he makes intercession to God against Israel, saying. This goes back to 1 Kings, the 18th and 19th chapters. And it's a wonderful account that we just don't have time to, delve in at length. But going back to this setting, Elijah has just won a great victory for God in chapter 18. Remember the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Remember that? Well, all you Israelites, you think that Baal is your God. Let's just have a contest. Remember that? Here's what we'll do. You erect an altar and you put your sacrifice on the altar and you call upon your God, and if he answers by fire, then we'll know that Baal is the true God. So they built the altar and they put their animal on there and they started leaping and jumping and hollering and carrying on. And who answered? You could have heard crickets chirp, right? There was no answer from heaven. Finally, they started doing what to themselves? Cutting themselves. Blood was flowing everywhere, thinking that the sight of blood would finally wake up their God to cause him to do something. Well, they'd have bled to death for Baal did something because there's no Baal. And then Elijah said, enough of this nonsense. Let me get the altar built back up that you and your conniption fit have thrown down. We'll build it back, put the animal on there. We'll drench it with water. We'll drench the trench around it with water. And Elijah just called upon God, and what happened? Fire came down from heaven, devoured the sacrifice, licked up the water, and then they destroyed, the people knew that God was God, and they destroyed the prophets of Baal. Great victory in chapter 18, but then in chapter 19, Elijah is what? Very, very low, depressed, and discouraged. What does Elijah think? There's nobody left faithful but me. Lord, they have killed thy prophets and destroyed the altars. I am the only man, because Jezebel, you see, is upset. She put a bounty on the head of Elijah and said, in 24 hours, I want him dead. Elijah hears that and he's on the run. He's out there sitting under a juniper tree, just really feeling sorry for himself, right? I'm the only person left. Was he right? This is what we call, or I say we, maybe those in psychology call tunnel vision. Tunnel vision. When you have tunnel vision, you're only looking at one thing from one perspective, and you ignore everything else. He's only looking at one situation, and all he sees is the bad. And people sometimes are like that today. This COVID-19, some have become so negative they become irrational. Irrational in this. They're so afraid to live, they're just existing. They're not living, they're just existing, because just being bombarded all day and in and out with this bad news, you get the mindset that things will never what? I've heard this said by a lot of folks. Things will never get what? Better. It's never ever going to get better. Never. But then I think back to the plague of the Black Death that devastated most of Europe. Did things get better? What about the Spanish flu, 1918 to 1920? The virus that we're facing now hasn't killed a fraction of the people that virus killed. Did things get better after the Spanish flu, or the world just fall apart? It got better. It got better. But when you get tunnel vision, you get the idea it's never going to get any better. I'm the only one left. Oh, Elijah. Your problem is you're looking down. You're looking down, you're not looking up. That's verse 4. What saith the answer of God to him? What did God say? You the only one left? How many do I have? 7,000. You don't see the 7,000, Elijah, because you're looking down. You've got tunnel vision. God would tell Elijah, stop feeling sorry for yourself. I'm going to feed you. God fed him, and then God gave him something to do. Get up. I want you to get up. I've got a task for you to do. Whenever we get tunnel vision, we got to get our perspective off that line of thinking. We need to get up and get busy and get active doing something. Doing something. Things are going to get better. Things were better for Elijah. I have 7,000 over here. They haven't bowed the knee to Baal either. You're not alone. I've got 7,001 right here in this area, Elijah, if you want to count, who've not bowed the image to Baal. God has often done his best work through small groups of people. The 7,001 would be a minor fraction of the total population of the Jews at that time, but God has often done his greatest work through small groups of people. How many did Noah have? 8. Just 8. Gideon, you remember Gideon started out with a force of so many thousands. God whittled that down to how many? 300. 300. God often does his greatest work through small groups of people. I've got a lot of folks left, Elijah. Now, I haven't cast off the Jews. That's verse 5. Even so, at this present time, there is a remnant. There are some Jews who have obeyed the gospel and are faithful. They've responded to the election, the call of grace. And you can too, is Paul's point. We are past time, so we'll stop.